Welcome. I'm Bill Haney. Let's have a conversation. We have with us a very interesting guest who knows a lot about many important subjects and birds, but specifically today we're going to focus on one. Penny Briscoe is visiting us from the west side of the state, from Vicksburg near Kalamazoo. And she has not only studied, but has also been a landlord for 34 years for purple martins. Now, her work and her insights into purple martins gives us a stark reminder of a lesson that was taught to me many decades ago by my mother. As mothers are known to do, mine often reminded me of how true it is that you don't know how much you appreciate something until it's gone. And that lesson was brought home to me a few decades ago when I first got up close and personal with purple martins. We'll see some images of this beautiful and unusual bird as Penny tells us more about it. I hadn't really realized how much my family and I took the annual return and the summer occupancy of purple martins. But we didn't value them just for their legendary appetites, their prolific gobbling of pesky insects. Rather, it really was their fascinating personalities, their aerial acrobatics, their loyalty, their companionship on those hot summer months. That was what we had grown accustomed to on our 100 acres in Jackson County. And that was what we came to miss most of all. Perhaps Penny can tell us whether we can realistically expect purple martin numbers to rebound. Penny Briscoe, welcome to Conversations with Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
I'm glad to have you here. Penny and her husband, Rick, have been purple martin landlords for 34 years. And during that time, I believe they've hosted the same long-standing colony without much interruption on Barton Lake, and that is just south of Vicksburg in southwest Michigan. And over those years, I think you've made a number of changes to that colony in order to increase its success of the nesting pairs. I know you've also been a mentor, not just having your own colonies, but you've been a mentor for the nationwide Purple Martin Conservation Association. And you earned a master's degree designation through the Michigan Conservation Stewards Program, the MSU Extension Services. You're also a retired teacher, a public school educator. I know you're an English major. You've corrected me any number of times on my bad grammar. But we're delighted to have you here today. And I can tell the viewers that the members of the Clarkston Area Backyard Birders Club recently enjoyed and were edified by your presentation at the Gateway, where they have all their meetings. And you had a record crowd there. You had standing room only. And they enjoyed it mightily. But before we get into the specifics, why don't you just give us a general description of this bird, of this purple martin, and its place and how it's faring in today's environment.
Okay, well, that's a lot to ask in one breath. The purple martin is an aerial insectivore, which means that it only feeds in the air. It's a swallow. It's the largest of the swallow family, and it feeds higher in the air than all the other swallows. So it's not unusual to not see the purple martin around, and then suddenly you hear it, and you look up in the sky, and it's coming down lower. The purple martin has been sort of a backyard pet for people for several hundred years. The Native Americans began hanging gourds in their villages, probably because they noticed that the purple martins would eat the bugs, maybe off of their hides and that sort of thing. And then from there, the settlers started putting up purple martin houses. They became very popular. And then in about the 60s, it started to decline. People stopped putting housing up. The bird has become 100% dependent on human-provided nest cavities. So with people losing interest in the purple martin because everybody's gotten so busy, the martins are not finding as many nest opportunities, especially in the north. So across the northern USA, the purple martin has been declining. There's still a lot in the south. They are not designated as an endangered species, but people who have purple martins don't want to wait until it's a crisis before we do something. So that's kind of the story of the purple martin at this point. We're trying to get more housing up so people will manage their colonies and increase the number of birds.
So as a landlord for these birds, you probably have to do all the same things that any landlord would do in providing a clean and decent environment for them, a safe environment. I know that there are limitations to how far you can keep the housing of the bird from structures, from trees, from homes and other things. Is that a limitation that then you won't get the martins if you have them too close to trees or to structures, or what?
Well, interestingly, purple martins want to be around humans. So if you're going to attract purple martins, you need to put a purple martin house. And when I say purple martin house, it could also be a rack that has multiple gourds hanging on it. They're a very, they're kind of a groupie bird. And so they like to be in a community of purple martins. And most people have seen the multiple housing, the multiple nest cavity housing, a lot of times along lakes, sometimes in farms and ranches down in the south. But they have to be somewhere between 30 and 125 feet in order for a purple martin to consider that to be an appropriate place for nesting. It also has to be somewhere between 12 and 18 feet in the air. It has to be somewhere where there's a good bug supply, and there can be no trees taller than the housing within 40 feet.
Within 40 feet?
Yeah, so they have some pretty specific restrictions.
Right. Well, when I had our colonies, which I didn't even know enough to call them colonies then, but we had like a wooden hotel structure with might have been a dozen or more individual apartments. And later I grew bottle gourds, and I never made one of them into a purple martin house. I gave them to other people who did. But the ones that you showed at the Birders Club are artificial creation that looks a lot more sophisticated, but that apparently the martins have come to prefer that sort of a structure. And we will show our viewers some of these images as we go along. But that must have been an enhancement. So you find that those white gourd-like but artificial creations, you can hang them in combination with the old-fashioned apartment house martin houses, or not?
Well, you know, some of the old houses that you see out there, the rectangular white with green trim houses, they're still fine. A lot of people don't like those because they think they aren't insulated enough, and when the martins arrive, they start coming in the north quite early, and then it can snow, it can drop below freezing for a while. The birds would suffer because they're maybe not warm enough. But those houses work fine, and what people are starting to do now is hang gourds underneath. It could be one of these artificial gourds, of which there are many varieties, or it could be a natural gourd. There are people who actually grow large gourds and retrofit the gourd to be used for a purple martin nest cavity. The combination of the two is really good because from the air, and remember they fly really high, from the air they can actually hone in on the opening in the gourd and see that from a great distance.
Do they have sharp eyes like hawks and others, and they can see from a considerable distance and determine whether this is an appealing place for them to go, huh?
Absolutely. You know, they have eyesight that we can't even imagine. And so then they would come down and they would check out the gourd and or the house, if you've got a house. One thing they're recommending now is that people put pine needles, a layer of pine needles in the house, especially in the north when the birds come. It's cold, and they kind of nestle into the pine needles, and that helps keep them warm. So,
So they're temperature sensitive at that end, and I know also at the other, because one of the images that you showed at the Birders Club, you had put a roof or an awning over the top one summer when we had several days in a row of 100 degrees. So apparently that's a threat too, is the heat.
the purple martin chicks stay in the nest for 26 to 32 days. That's longer than most birds that size. And the purple martin, when they fledge in the air. They don't go on the ground. So you can imagine having anywhere from 2 to 7 chicks in this house, and now it's 100 degrees, and much warmer in there because the heat is more intense inside. So, you know, they can withstand high temperatures, but if it gets to be 100 degrees for any number of days, even just a couple of days, you know, they're imperiled. There are people who actually fill disposable water bottles with water, freeze them, and put them in cavities next door to the ones that have the purple martins in them, and that helps keep them cool.
Kind of a Rube Goldberg air conditioning.
Exactly.
pattern.
Down in the south, some of the farmers and landlords down there, they actually put misters up the poles, and then when it gets really, really hot down there, as it often is, they turn their misters on.
Ingenious.
It's and it's a real show of love.
Wait, but you talk about a number of days. How do you know? How can you keep track of when the eggs are laid and when they break through the shell and are tiny babies in there, and when they fledge? How do you know all that?
Well, there is a way to monitor, and we call it manage, our purple martin colony. Not everybody does it, and not everybody has to do it, but if you really want to know what's going on and you want to get the largest number of chicks you can possibly get to survive and fledge, you start monitoring from the very beginning. Right now, I'm waiting for my first purple martin to come in southwest Michigan, and there have not been any sightings in our area yet, but on the Purple Martin Conservation Association website, there is a map, and there's a way you can go on there very simply and see how the birds have traveled north. Very similar to what there is for the monarch butterflies and the hummingbirds. So I know right now that there are purple martins in Middlebury, Indiana, and that's about 35 miles from my house. So
They're coming in
They're
your
coming,
direction.
yeah.
Now, where are they coming from the long distance? Where have they gone to when they leave your place, your apartments and bottle gourds and things, and they migrate south? And how far do they go?
in mid-June, when the first purple martins in the north tend to be have fledged their young, they start to form groups called roosts. And then when these large groups are ready, they hang out, they eat, they get fat, they're ready for their flight, they head down in large groups all over the eastern United States, this side of the Rockies, and they head mostly to Brazil. And they winter in Brazil, and they don't nest in Brazil, they just hang out in the trees and enjoy life. You know, they're kind of like snowbirds. And then come spring, they start to head north, and Florida, Texas, Louisiana, they start to get their purple martins maybe the second week of January. And for some reason, a lot of them decide to come further north, and that's where we get purple martins too.
Fortunate for us, because they do, they're very important in insect control. And I know that on the other hand, it's controversial because a lot of people are averse to insects, but yet if we don't have insects, we don't have birds. or many of them, the insectivores. And I know that one of your coping mechanisms is to have a stash of food for the birds, especially when the temperatures drop. If they come here, say it's a nice warm couple of days, and they come up to your place, and then suddenly we get a cold snap. How long can they go without any natural food available, and then what do you do to get them through that crisis?
It's an unnatural event to feed purple martins, but all the studies and citizen science information that's been provided indicates that you can actually train purple martins to eat out of a tray. Some people actually throw maybe a handful of crickets up in the air, or mealworms, or even scrambled eggs. Mine eat out of trays. I taught them how to do that about 10 years ago. And so when the weather is bad for 2 days, only when the weather's bad, I can bring down my purple martin house because it's on a pole system. You've got a pulley or a cable system. You can bring the whole thing down to eye level. You have feeding trays down there, or you might have a separate feeding tray. And then I put fresh frozen crickets that have been thawed out and live mealworms in the tray. The tray has an edge. And then I hoist it back up because martins will not go to the ground to feed. So then they go to the tray and they eat, and it sustains them through the bad weather.
Oh, that gets them through the crisis time.
Right,
Huh?
yep.
Yeah. Well, what about people that have had purple martins colonies, and now the martins aren't showing up? Is there a chance that they might return, and do the same birds return to, do you know the individual birds? Can you really distinguish one from another?
Mostly no, they all look the same, but you might get a bird now and then. It has some unusual markings, but for the most part, you don't really know. Last year was the first year I actually had my birds banded. And so now I can look for the bands. And if I can read the number on the leg, then I can determine that that was a bird that was fledged from my colony. They think about 10% of the birds that fledge from your colony return to your colony. After the birds are mature, after they've gotten old enough that they can go off on their own, the parents pretty much push them out of the colony because now they're a threat and they're a competition for the housing. So yeah, you can't really tell. I can't tell, and I don't think other landlords can, which bird is which. But they do return. They will return to the very same colony, to the very same nest cavity every year until they perish. And they can live up to 9 years.
Oh, 9 years?
So, yeah, it's a dangerous trip, so it doesn't always happen.
Yeah, there are many perils along the way.
Lots of perils along the way.
Penny, what can a landlord expect as a successful percentage, say, of fledging?
In the wild, and if there is no management in a colony, a 50% fledge rate would be kind of typical. Of those 50% that fledge, only about 30% perish in the first year. A lot of people don't know how many baby birds don't make it to the second year. If you manage a colony, though, you can get 75, 80, 90. Last year I had a 95% fledge rate. And that's because I feed the birds and I pay attention to what's going on in there.
The details are really important, aren't they?
Very important if you want a high fledge rate.
Now, if people want to get more information, and there's a lot of good information out there, I know there's some organizations that they can obtain some of that from. Can you tell us about a couple of those, perhaps?
Sure. The first one that's probably the most all-encompassing, it's called the Purple Martin Conservation Association. It's actually located in Presque Isle, Pennsylvania. And they have a website, purplemartin.org, or you can just Google Purple Martin Conservation Association. They will talk to you on the telephone. They've got flyers and brochures and all kinds of information if you just want to take it off the website. They have Martin mentors like myself that are registered with them. And they have a store, so you can, if you don't buy it from them, you can at least look at what is kind of best practice in housing. The other organization, of course, is Michigan Audubon. Michigan Audubon has gotten a federal grant to help increase numbers in Michigan. And we established through Michigan Audubon a Facebook page, which I would recommend.
Okay.
It's called Michigan Purple Martin Friends. And that's a Facebook page. You have to ask if you to join. I think we have 136 members now. It's only been in existence for maybe 2 years now. And then finally, you can contact me. I talked to a lot of people throughout, starting maybe a month ago through the end of September. And I'm happy to receive emails. If somebody sends me an email with a question, I'll be happy to get right back to you.
And I, for one, will take you up on that.
All right.
Penny, this has been a very interesting flight into the life of an intriguing bird. And I want to thank you for sharing your insights and your photographs from your 34 years of studying and being a faithful landlord to this special bird, the purple martin. And I want to thank our viewers for sitting in with us. We'll be with you again soon for another conversation. And if you have suggestions for a topic for a conversation or a specific guest you might want to recommend with a story of interest to our viewers, you can send them to my care at Independence Township Public Access Television Studios at Clarkston High School. Thanks again for being with us, and I'll see you at the next Conversation with Bill.